Hello guys, what's going on? Today we're going to talk about angle kits, how they work, angle in general, how it works, even if you've got like cut knuckles, extended control arms, things like that. But I'm going to be using my competition drift car E36. So a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about are going to be somewhat specific to the E36 chassis. A little bit similar on the E46s, but we're mainly going to be talking about angle kits, but I'll touch a little bit on how you can get angle. If you've seen drift cars and wonder how they get all that angle out of them, or if you drift and just want to learn a little bit more about them. At first I'm going to just talk a little bit about the basics, and then towards the end of the video I'm going to get into a little bit more complicated things and some of the BS that comes with getting that much angle kits in general. It's not specific to a single brand, it's just all of them. So if you're just here to learn a little bit about how drift cars get angle, towards the end, it might not be for you, but if you want to get into nitty-gritty about drift cars and angle kits and how all that works, and you want to learn how to make your car feel better, I am gonna dig into all of that, and that's mainly why I wanted to make this video, because this car has been the biggest pain in my ass. Just in the last couple of days I was able to figure everything out and get like full lock with the proper setup, like alignment and all that, and I've been building this car for over a year now, so just give you an idea of how bad it can be, especially if you're just figuring it out on your own, because a lot of the companies out there don't give you that information. So all right, let's dig into it. The basics. You've heard of cut knuckles. So this car has FDF on it, so they don't use the stock knuckle anymore, but I do have a stock knuckle that I can show you what cut knuckles mean. Alright, so right here, this is a stock E36 knuckle. This is where your control arm would connect, and this is where your tie rod would go. Pretty much what people do on a lot of like older style setups, or just if you want cheap angle. Pretty much gonna cut this section that the tie rod connects to, and you're gonna move it closer to where your control arm connects. So to give you an example, from center to center is about 5 inches on this stock knuckle. So you would move it back, an inch or 2 or whatever, depending on how much you can get without over centering, but that's a little bit more complicated. We can get into that in a little bit. But yeah, that's pretty much the most basic way of getting more angle on your car. And pretty much what's happening is you're moving this closer to the control arm, and when you are pushing here you get low angle, but when you move it here with the same movement you can get a lot more angle and movement. So I'm going to demonstrate that concept on this door here. So if I push a little bit on the door, it moves just that much, but if I go closer to where the hinges are and I move it the same amount, the door actually shuts. So that's pretty much the concept behind it. So if you look here, like we talked about earlier, on the stock knuckle from center to center was about 5 inches. Right here it's about 3 1/4. So it's about 1 3/4 inches closer to the control arm pickup point on the knuckle. So that gets you a lot more angle from the same movement at the steering rack. So okay, so that's pretty much it for cut knuckles. That's how you can get a little bit more angle out of them. if you've heard of the term extended control arms or aftermarket control arms that are a little bit longer, the reason behind that is when you get more angle out of your car now, what happens is if this was a stock length control arm, my wheel would probably be like here. So it would hit the chassis, and that's pretty much the entire reason why people either cut them and extend them, but the best way of doing it is getting a custom made one by a company. So yeah, this is the most basic way of getting more angle on a drift car. If you didn't know that, now you know. If you're a drifter and you already knew that, that's cool. But that's pretty much the concept behind it. Even some people that drive don't know it. But I'm gonna get to the point of why we're doing this. Anyways, the other way of going about getting more angle, if let's say you had a car with cut knuckles and you got the hang of it and you want a little bit more angle, or you're just getting into drifting, you're like, I don't even want to mess with any of that, I just want an angle kit that works. Cool. That's all cool in theory, but I'm gonna show you why you need to do your research and all that before thinking you can just bolt it on and go. The biggest reason why people go to angle kits is the geometry isn't going to be perfect when you just cut your knuckles and extend your control arms. Companies have gone through and redesigned the whole system, and they kind of give you a finished product, so you don't have to sit there and figure out, okay, how much do I need to cut, how much do I need to extend my control arm. There's a lot of geometry and physics that goes into all that, so they already figure all that out for you, and all you have to do is bolt it on and go. So from that perspective, that's the biggest reason why people do it. Another thing is, like, you can get way more angle. Your control arm can be way longer. For example, like Weissfab and FDF, they'll give you like a full redesigned knuckle, so all of the geometry will be corrected on some things. So in this example, you'll get a control arm that's longer, an extended tie rod. You know, if you get their upgraded setup, you can get the entire tie rod, inner and outer sleeve, everything high, and you will get a full knuckle, so you no longer have to use the stock one at all. You know, the biggest reason you would do that is because everything's behind and all the geometry is just kind of already configured for you, so no play when you go all solid heims and bushings. So that's pretty much the biggest reason why people that want to do more like competitive setups and more angle, it just in theory is supposed to work a lot better. So yeah, pretty much an angle kit consists of extended control arm, sometimes a knuckle or an adapter that brings the pickup points closer to each other. So if an angle kit doesn't provide a full knuckle, the way they do it is it will be an adapter that bolts onto the stock knuckle, and then it moves your tie rod pickup point closer to the control arm. And that's pretty much the basic concept of it. You will also need a what's called a top hat. If you don't have a coilover on a car that's got an angle kit, it will not work, because you're gonna need like aftermarket top hats so you can adjust your camber and caster. We'll get into that in a little bit, but that usually will not work with like a stock shock because of the Heinz style on the top hat. So to give you an idea, not the full amount of angle that this car has. There is probably another 10 to 20 degrees, and we'll use that to get into the whole reason why I'm making this video. So, big problem with thinking you can just buy an angle kit, bolt it on, and you'll have all the angle, and you know, there'll be sunshine and rainbows, and you'll have fun and drive, blah blah blah. That's not the case. I don't care what brand it is. I don't care who made it, unless you specifically took your measurements and specifically modified your car and you built your own custom setup to fully work on your car and you set it up that way. You cannot buy an angle kit, put it on a car, and just go drive without spending a lot of hours, a lot of time figuring it out for your specific setup, for your specific car, chassis, everything. Every small change changes everything on these angle kits. You're pretty much taking your stock setup and everything that the engineers have done at the factory and you're changing it. They spent millions of dollars trying to configure that, and a aftermarket company is not going to do that for you. So you have to do it yourself. I'm going to start talking about some of those things. So the biggest part is your alignment and your height adjustment on the car. Those are probably the two biggest things that will affect your setup. So if you get an angle kit and you're having a lot of issues, things are binding, it just gets stuck sometimes, if you're not getting enough angle, these things are pretty much what's going to cause you a lot of issues. So these companies will build a decent product, but if you just bolt it on and don't pay attention to any of the other aspects of the suspension, it is not going to work. So let's talk about much camber and caster. So I have come to the conclusion that angle kits are built, and when they are built, they are pretty much made to be ran at a specific spectrum of height and a specific spectrum of camber caster. Your toe doesn't matter, you can run whatever toe you want, but you cannot just install a kit and be like, oh, I want to run 10 degrees of negative camber, or I don't want to run any camber, or I want to run 10 degrees of caster, or I don't want to run any caster. It is not up to you. You are going to have to run pretty much whatever they built the kit to run, and that is a big thing that people miss. If you don't do that, or at least stay within those degrees of alignment, you're going to have a lot of problems. And I didn't know that, and I am just a one-man band, and I've been just figuring this out on my own until I spent a lot of time doing research and a lot of time working on the car, taking footage of it, seeing how the suspension is articulating, what's happening, what's binding, what's moving, what's going on. So I'm gonna kind of dumb it all down for you guys to make it a lot easier. So when you extend your control arm, you are automatically going to get a bunch of negative camber, which is the angle at which your wheel is at, when it's static. It's not moved at all. So you can tell with mine being extended, it's got, 6 degrees of camber or whatever. So that's one thing that's going to happen. Also, when you install the top hats, that is why they give you those, so you can take camber out of it and correct those issues. We'll talk about the problems you start getting into from caster and camber. Okay, so these are the things that a lot of YouTubers that drift don't really talk about, especially if they're big enough and they are sponsored or they get help from the companies that provide these products. They're not going to talk about it to discourage people, which I totally understand, but this needs to be talked about. Or it's a lot of times it's the people that sell this stuff and they don't want to discourage you. They don't want to kind of overwhelm you with all this information, because there is a ton of geometry and physics that goes into this, and they're not gonna go, oh, buy this product, but you need to know this and that about geometry and physics and blah blah blah. You don't need to have a degree, but you just need to know these things. But you pretty much have to reverse engineer all of this stuff and figure out how it works, and they're not going to tell you that, because then they won't sell any of these things and the sport won't progress. So I totally get that, but I think people need to talk more about this stuff, because you see people out there struggling, the alignment's all weird, the car binds, don't have, like, my biggest issue is having front traction, but that's a little bit different story. This is a very different animal of a car, so that's not really relevant for most people. So here is the biggest problem with binding issues and things like that, and then we'll get into over centering. So when you extend your control arm, your wheel is gonna get a bunch of camber. That's why you get the top hat to move it over, and you can get a lot of that out. Not every chassis will allow you to have like completely full adjustment. Another problem is you're limited to like where your shock mounts, and that's why you see a lot of people, especially like in higher level competition, you'll see like the whole tower is cut and they've moved it, blah blah blah. The legality of that is kind of a gray area. I don't like doing that because I don't like being in a gray area, but if you're building a car that's not going to be competing, you can just do whatever you want. It's a little sketchy. I don't recommend it. But I've had to do some stuff to be able to compensate, and those are just some things that I don't like to show that much, but they are within legal reasons. But the reason I'm not going to show them is they're kind of in a gray area, but very much safe, very much legal. But a lot of times you are not able to achieve this. The other thing is like your caster adjustment sometimes is going to be from up there. On the E36s, you've got your lollipop heim that you can extend and retract, and that adjusts your camber and caster. So when you start getting into a lot of angles, a lot of degrees on the camber and caster, this starts happening. You notice how this knuckle is not actually parallel to this control arm and tie rod. This is a very big problem if you want your stuff to work. A lot of camber and a lot of caster will make this a lot worse. And here's the biggest dilemma. If you want the car to drive good with an angle kit, you have to run a decent amount of camber, 4.5 degrees to 6 degrees negative camber. The reason why is because you have to run a lot of caster for the car to self-center or self-steer. Those are some of the terms that people use. What that is like when you're turned all the way, or if you turn a little bit and you let go, you want your wheel to go back straight, or in drifting, when you're transitioning, you want your wheel to turn on its own. You don't want to sit there and have to turn it yourself, because you're never going to be able to do it as fast as the car is transitioning, and you're going to spin out. So you have to run, depending on the kit, probably, minimum of 5 degrees, and some people go up to 10, 11, depending on the chassis and the level that you're doing it at. So here's the problem. You want to be able to run those camber and caster settings, but what a lot of people don't tell you is that you end up with this crazy angle at the knuckle. There's a fancy term for it, but I'm going to try and keep this as basic as possible, and we're just going to call this the angle of the knuckle. As this gets more severe, you will get into a lot of binding issues where like your heim will start touching, like the tie rod heim will start touching the knuckle, or your control arm heim starts touching. Like right now, this is the reason why I can't turn this wheel anymore. It's not hitting anything else. There's no bump stops, nothing. But this all gets corrected once the car is on the ground, and this is how I have it set up. It doesn't need to work properly on the lift, because the car is never going to drive on the lift. And this is another big problem, is if you set up your angle kit on the lift, it's not going to act the same on the ground, because your shock's going to compress, everything, all your angles here are going to change. So you have to take that into consideration. So this car will go to full lock, full angle. The inner tie rod will hit the steering rack if I let it. So that all happens when it's on the ground, and when it's on the lift, it doesn't. And that just tells you that small of a change when it gets on the ground will change the car drastically. So why does that happen? You have a lot of angle on the shock because of the caster. You have a lot of angle on it from the camber. So the reason why we run camber is as the wheel turns with a lot of caster, it wants to tilt this way, and if you don't add negative camber, you're gonna ride like pretty much on this much of the tire when it's on the ground. So we put negative camber in it to compensate and get more contact on the surface that you're driving on, and you don't lose as much traction at full angle. So if you don't have that much traction at full lock, you need more camber, or you need to take caster out. So this is the biggest problem. Your caster camber will affect this. Also, your ride height is a huge variable in this. So not all cars have just one lower control arm. Some cars have two, and that's even more complicated, because now you're having to make sure all the angles on both control arms and the heim and all that is proper. But yeah, as you lower and raise your car, the angle here changes, your camber changes. So you're stuck with running a specific ride height, you're stuck with running a specific caster and camber, not down to like the degree, but let's say you at that ride height, you're gonna be able to run 4 degrees of camber, 6 degrees, 7 degrees of caster. At certain ride heights, that's all gonna change. Otherwise, you're gonna start binding on all of that stuff, and nobody really tells you all of that information. You just kind of have to figure out on your own. The kind of majority of people run, you know, between 4 and 6 degrees of camber, and, you know, 6 and 10 degrees of caster. So you have to sit there and figure out what works for you at your ride height. Pretty much your ride height's gonna determine all of that. On this car, I'm stuck at this ride height. I can't change it at this alignment settings. If I change my ride height to lower, I can actually put more camber and caster into it. If I raise the car, I have to take a bunch of camber and caster out of it. So it's just how everything ends up aligning as you go higher. So your control arm drops, your angles are gonna get more extreme, and everything's gonna bind as you raise it back up. You're gonna be more level with the tie rod and the knuckle, so you will be able to articulate a little bit more. So yeah, I just really wanted to mention this stuff. Nobody really talks about it. People are like, I get binding issues and blah blah blah. It's like you have to run pretty much what they designed it to run at. If you want to be like a super stance guy and you want to be slammed, blah blah, that's cool. I mean, a lot of the angle kits kind of are made to work at lower heights, so you shouldn't have that much of an issue. But when you want like ground clearance, blah blah blah, and you want to run a higher ride height, you're gonna start running into some issues. So yeah, another big thing is when you bring the pickup point on the tie rod closer to the control arm, you're changing the angle at the steering rack right here. I'm trying to adjust this a little bit, show you. But pretty much what over centering is, this car, the angle kit is made to correct all that. On some cars, you have to move your rack to change the position it's at. So when you're at full lock, you don't get to the point where the pickup point on the knuckle is past the pickup point on the rack. And what over centering is you no longer having control over the wheel, because you're now not completely perpendicular to the knuckle. So in order for you to be able to control the knuckle and the wheel, you have to be at, you know, 90-degree angle and more. But when you get to where like you're getting close to the same angle, your tie rods is not gonna have control over the knuckle anymore, and that happens because you're now way over centered. And what happens is your wheel is just gonna shake like this because your tie rod no longer has control over it. So that's pretty much what over centering is, and angle kits usually will correct for that, or you have to space your steering rack. Some kits will actually move the inner tie rod. So like, let's say I wanted, you know, I have issues, and you'll end up moving it this way, or like on a rear mounted rack, you would move it the other way. So you can always achieve a perpendicular angle at the knuckle, so you can always have control over it, and you are never to the point where this is the tie rod and this is the wheel, and you can have control over it when you can push on it. But when the wheel is pretty much almost parallel, you can no longer have control of it. So yeah, that's another big part of it. If your wheel just shakes like this, that's probably one of your issues. If you have an angle kit, your binding, check your ride height and what you can run for camber and caster at that ride height. You're gonna have to either lower or raise your car to get caster in and out, camber caster in and out. So like, it takes a lot of time, man. I've spent a lot of time working on this setup, and like I've just pretty much spent the whole like last 2 full days with everything loose on this car, like the coilover adjustment, camber caster adjustment, everything is just loose, and I had to like just keep going up and down, change camber and caster until I got it to where it actually lets it go lock to lock when the car is on the ground. So the biggest things to take from this, pretty much gonna close this video out here. It's gonna be way too long. Like, I can talk about this stuff forever, but I just wanted to bring a little bit of light to some of these things, because you always see like in YouTube videos, oh, I'll just bolt the control, you know, an angle kit and go drive. It's like, no, man, show me the month of sitting there messing with it, trying to get it to work. So just keep that in mind. Biggest advice is you'll want to set it up for when it's on the ground. Know that you are not going to be able to run like a crazy ride height, like crazy low or crazy high. Your camber and caster, you have to be within the range that they built it for. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. They designed it to run a certain amount of camber and caster, so the kit works. Otherwise, you're going to have binding issues. Pay attention to what your tie rod's doing in relation to your knuckle, because if you over center and start shaking, it's a really bad day. So yeah, those are the biggest things, is just check your alignment. Your first thing is ride height, and then check your alignment, see if that works at that ride height. If it doesn't, then you're gonna have to change some things, and you know, make sure you do it on the ground. You're gonna spend a whole, you know, day or two getting it to work on the lift, and then you're gonna drop it on the ground and be like, well, none of it actually works now. So you're gonna have to set it up on the lift and then drop it down, move just the wheel lock to lock, see what hits, blah blah blah, go back up and make your adjustments. So I will insert a video of the car actually now performing. In the video you'll see I had a sway bar that I was just testing out, but yeah, the wheel was hitting that. That's why it didn't go like all the way to full lock, but I've since taken that off. I'm gonna real quick mention something that a lot of people also don't talk about before I finally close this out. Your camber and caster will affect your traction. So if you are someone that likes to have a lot of rear traction, or you run a big tire, or you actually have a competition car, this angle will affect your straight line traction. So like when you're going straight, if you hit the brakes, blah blah blah, if you turn a little bit, the more camber you have here, static, you will have less traction. Also, like your dampening setup, your compression rebound is also gonna affect that, but I'm mainly talking about the angle kit and how it affects your traction. Remember how I said we run negative camber to offset for all that caster pulling the wheel? Because we have negative camber to compensate, and this wheel gets plenty of traction at full lock. The more caster you run, the least amount of surface of the tire you're putting on the ground. So that's another thing that you have to be mindful of, is the camber and caster will affect your traction levels if you are running high traction setups in the rear. So that's a big thing that I need to tackle going forward now. I've got the front end going lock to lock at a decent ride height, and the alignment setups that I like to run, which is what takes a really long time. So now I need to tackle figuring out how I can get more traction with this current alignment settings and ride height. Good thing I have a decent amount of control with my coilovers, and usually when you get a decent, you're able to go lock to lock, and you're within 4 to 6 degrees of negative camber, and 6 to 10 degrees of caster, your setup is usually going to be pretty good. And yeah, another way of being able to control some other things, and this is pretty much the last thing I'm going to talk about before closing this video, is your Ackermann settings. So your Ackermann is where the tie rod pickup is on the knuckle. So not in relation to the control arm, so not this way. Your Ackermann setting is where your pickup point of the tie rod on the knuckle this way. So this is your leading wheel. So if you're turning right, this will be your leading wheel. This is your trailing wheel. This would be pro Ackermann. This would be neutral. This would be anti, or some people say like negative, positive, Ackermann, neutral. Whichever term you talk about, this is how this works. So neutral would be like pretty much center. So it turns the trailing wheel, this wheel, the same amount as the leading wheel. If you go more in, more out, towards outside of the car, so you're picking up, more outside of the knuckle, you are going to be able to grab and pull the trailing wheel knuckle more, and what that will give you is pro Ackermann. So this wheel is going to be turned in a lot more, well, a little bit more than the lead wheel. And then if you go out, you grab it a little bit less, and that gives you anti or negative Ackermann. So like this wheel's here, this wheel's here. And that's pretty much what I like to run. Neutral is decent if you have, you don't have enough angle and you want to compensate that way. Like if your angle kit just doesn't give you that much, I would run a neutral just to give you a little bit more angle. I have plenty of angle, so I like to run a little bit of a difference. So you can see this wheel is turned in more than that wheel a little bit. The reason I like that is because this is how most manufacturers set up cars. The leading wheel will turn more and the trailing wheel turns a little bit less because the leading wheel needs to go around the corner. It's set up that way for a reason. Your outside wheel is going to turn faster as you're turning, but in drifting things are way different. So a lot of people, they like to play with their Ackermann, so the reason I like to run a little bit of negative is to get a little bit of scrub. So what that means is, as I am sideways, if this wheel was the exact same or more, it's not gonna scrub a little bit, and it just, the front end is gonna move the same between the two wheels. So a little bit of scrub will slow down the front end a little bit. Some people don't like that because if you have too much traction at full lock, it can cause you to spin out. Also, like in competition, like on a bank track, that might like pull you out of the zone. So if your car has too much grip, it ends up driving out of the zone. So people go like neutral, or if you're still not, able to maintain angle and staying up on the bank or in a zone or an out of zone, you're gonna need, pro Ackermann or positive Ackermann. I don't have these issues. I run, a decent amount of traction in this car. I run a 285 or a 295, pretty grippy setup. It does push through right now, so I'm working on figuring that out. But I like to stay anti or negative Ackermann, especially like in chase, when you're chasing close. It gives you a little bit of scrub in the front. That way when you're like transition and dive in, the front end doesn't just wash right over and kind of like hit the other person. It gives you a little bit of predictability. But sometimes you have to figure out what is more important. You want that, or you want to be able, to have more traction and stuff like that. So that's kind of another thing I have to mess with while I figure out the traction. That's why I really wanted to mention that, because I have a problem with this car pushing through the front, but I have yet to test with the car working properly. So the next time I go and test this car will be the first time I ever had a proper alignment settings that I liked, with having the full angle of the angle kit. I've always had to either limit my angle, or I've had to run like really weird alignment settings, like really low caster and low camber, like, which is terrible. You'll never get the good feel. It's never gonna self-steer. Or like if I wanted more angle, I get the angle, all of the angle, none of the camber and caster. If I go more caster and camber, I can't get any of the angle. And that was the biggest dilemma, and this is why I wanted to make this video. So biggest take is, do your research, know what you're doing. It's not just bolt it on and go. Don't get discouraged, it's part of it. They just don't tell you that, and you have to figure it out. But when you do, it's usually pretty sweet. Drift cars are not really meant to be hard to drive, especially like when you spend the money on the proper setup and the proper parts. They're supposed to be, you pay to get a car that feels good. It's not supposed to like be like hard to drive or really shitty experience. Like, it's supposed to be proper, and when you do it right, it will be worth it. So don't be discouraged. It's definitely worth it. This isn't to tell you, oh, like if you don't know any of this stuff, don't do it. Like I'm just showing you that you should be prepared. And yeah, if you don't know how angle kits work, now you have a little bit of an idea. This is just my info on it. You know, a lot of people probably know more than me, but you know, I wanted to share my experience with it. But yeah, you know, now you know a little bit more about how angle kits work, how drift cars get angle, and if you are more serious about it, you will learn maybe, hopefully, some more technical things that you can use to your advantage. And yeah, I mean, like I said, I can talk about this all day, but I'm gonna cut it short here before this video ends up being like 2 hours. Yeah, I hope this was informative for you guys. I hope you got something out of it. If you did, let me know. Like, comment, subscribe. I guess, you know, I try to do cool stuff. If there's something I didn't mention or I said something wrong or right, just let me know in the comment section. I was like hearing people's feedback, if it's positive or negative. It makes me do better setting up the car, driving, and filming. So yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Hopefully we'll be out testing with this thing soon. So